My name is Joel, and today we're going to be working on replacing the main fuel pump and fuel filter on my 1987 Volvo 740 Turbo. We are also going to be replacing the fuel injectors. Before we get started, I wanted to go ahead and show you the fuel injectors that I got in the mail. These are from a company called Injector Rehab. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. They don't sponsor me. I just really like this company. So basically, I got these fuel injectors from a friend of mine. These are the same factory green tops that I have on the 740. What happened with this car is before I purchased it, it basically sat unused for about a year, and I know that the fuel rail was disconnected, as in the injectors were hanging out in the breeze, removed from the fuel rail. So just to be on the safe side, since it doesn't run as good as I would like, I'm going to go ahead and install these. So I mailed these fuel injectors to Injector Rehab. They go ahead and clean them and flow test them. I mentioned this in one of my other videos previously, but assuming you haven't seen that, I basically just wanted to show you. They send you each injector with new O-rings, and they even sent me a handy printout. I won't open it up, but they send a printout that shows the flow rates and everything. So great company. I highly recommend them. Every time I've actually gotten stuff from them, they've done a great job. I've gotten motorcycle and car injectors cleaned by them. So anyways, that's that. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to do. And here is the cradle that holds the main fuel pump and the fuel filter. You can see in the top, just to the right of center, there is a banjo bolt that is connected to the filter, and then behind that there is a fuel line that goes into the pump. So that fuel line in the rear comes back here, and that connects to the in-tank pump. And then the hard line on the filter, that should be the one that actually goes to the front of the car and is your main fuel line. So that's going to be high pressure, and that's why it does have a banjo fitting on it. And when I'm removing the fuel filter line, I'm going to try to get a wrench on the filter itself to try to keep it from turning to hold the filter, and then I'm going to put a socket or wrench on the actual banjo bolt. I believe the banjo bolt is an 18 millimeter, but I'm not sure about the filter itself. The line on the back should have a clamp on it. It looks like it is still there. It looks like a Phillips head. Once you get that clamp off, you should be able to remove that line a little bit more easily. And there is an electrical connector in the back here that I can't see, that I'm going to want to disconnect. And then there's a few bolts. You see there's one right there. There should be two more bolts on the other side that actually mount this to the vehicle. So once you've disconnected your two lines and your electrical connector, you should be able to remove those three bolts. I think they're 12 millimeter, and then drop the whole assembly down. And we will go ahead and do that and then see what we see. Oh yeah, and if I didn't say it already, always use eye protection when you're messing with fuel. Well, I don't have a wrench that fits, and ordinarily I wouldn't use pliers like this, but since we are replacing the filter, it doesn't really matter what happens to the head of that thing. Let's give it a shot. Oh, I see fuel! Yay! Fuel good! Normally you don't want to see fuel, but for this job, it is the desired result. There we go. So I successfully removed the fuel line going to the pump from the back of the car, and then I just disconnected the banjo bolt for the fuel line going from the filter to the front of the car. And now I'm hoping I can get to that electrical connector. Well, it's not good, but it's not terrible. It looks like somebody has been in here before me, and the connector is nowhere to be found. It looks like they made a hardline connection, but you've got ring terminals that are ending on the fuel pump. Okay. So the good news is those should be easy to remove. The bad news is I think I need to drop the cage in order to get to them. Try and use my little ugga-dugga here. Ah! Okay. So yes, of course, gravity means that as I tip this, more fuel comes out. Yay! The good news is it looks like they lengthened this wire. Yeah, I mean, we know it works because it's noisy as all get out. And here is our cradle. So you may not be able to see everything that I'm doing. Oh, yay, more fuel. Let me pour that out real quick. So this is the part right here is where I unplugged the line that had the clamp, and then the banjo bolt came off of here. There it is. So it fell into the drink. And these come with copper washers. You do want to use new ones because you are trying to seal fuel. My kit did come with new ones, so I'm not worried about that. And you want to be careful not to cause any problems with this line here. This is not a typical rubber line. I think it might even be a metal line. And this is basically sealing off this connection from the pump to the filter. So this should remain intact. You don't want to mess about with that. That being said, you do need to take this banjo bolt off here because obviously you are taking the filter off because we're replacing it. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay. So my success was using an impact. Just to make things confusing, the other end of the filter is a 19. And the washers are larger because it is a 19. These don't look... Well, I got one copper and one aluminum. Interesting. The other one is 2 copper. You can't really mess them up because the threads are different and the washers are different sizes. So that's our filter right there. So it's kind of hard to see, but there's a bolt here that holds a bracket on, and there's a bolt here that holds a bracket on. And this thing is really secure. The problem is that when you flip it over, it's not easy to get to those. Okay. All right, so it looks like the way it works is you only have to take that one out because there's a slot cut in the bracket. So once you have that out, you should be able to loosen this. Granted, it may not have been loosened for a long time, but it's turning. Now, before I take this off completely, I'm gonna open up my new one. So this is a Bosch. I bought both Bosch items. Obviously there's lots of options available because this is an old Volvo red block, and it looks like this has to come off. So 17 and 18. This should be much easier than using pliers like an uncultured Philistine. It's not a Bosch unit, so that would tell me that it probably has been replaced. So away we go. All right, so I can go back to what I was doing with the screwdriver. Loosen this mamma jamma. I was all kinds of intentional about remembering my wire colors, but duh, they're labeled positive and negative. Ta-da! This is the best part when we start putting it back together. Ah. There we go. Alright, so I'm inserting the banjo bolt, making sure to use new hardware. I'm intentionally leaving this filter loose here because I want to get its position right. And now that I've got its position where I think it needs to be, I'll go ahead and tighten this bolt down. So, we have taken and replaced our fuel pump, and we have replaced our fuel filter. And this is where again, the fuel line will go, coming from the rear pump from the tank. And then this is where the line will go that goes forward to the front of the car. So I'm gonna go ahead and put it on. Everything is in the reverse of removal, basically going to make sure I get my positive and negative terminals correctly installed, and then I will put it back on and we will see how it looks. Okay, so we are done with that part of the project. A couple of things I want to point out. First of all, the connections that were on there were aftermarket. Somebody had added some wiring to basically what was on the car, and the reason was because they were using an aftermarket fuel pump. So they had put these ring terminals over studs which were threaded. The studs that come on the Bosch fuel pump are not threaded, so they're supposed to have the factory connector. So what I did was I cut these off and I put some female bullet connectors on, and I got those, they're the right size that they actually fit snugly over those posts, and there's not nearly as much extra wiring. So I did that. I also want to mention that the size of wrench that you need to put on the end of the fuel filter when you're putting the banjo bolt on should be a 22. It was either 22 or 21. I can't remember which, but it is a metric size. The one that I took off was not a metric size, which is why I had to use a pair of pliers. Anyways, it's done, it's snug, I'm happy with it. Let's go ahead and move on to the fuel rail. And back up top here, we are looking at the fuel rail itself. And this one has got a few 10mm bolts. I see one right here. I think there's one or two more a little bit further back that hold the fuel rail to the actual intake manifold. And what we're gonna do is disconnect that and pull it back so we can get clearance to remove our injectors. One of the reasons I'm doing these both at the same time is because I'm pretty sure that the fuel pump is on its way out just from the noises it's making. It's possible we have an issue with the in-tank fuel pump, but I'm gonna start with this main one. And I wanted to depressurize the fuel system anyways if we're gonna be taking these injectors out. So we're just gonna do it all at once. So basically doing the fuel pump first and letting kind of the fuel drip out of the lines will make me feel a lot better about pulling the lines off here and not getting sprayed in the eye with fuel. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, that was pretty easy. I would suspect that if you're dealing with this and it's been who knows how long since your fuel rail has been out, that it will not be like that. These are just squeeze connectors on these injectors. Squeeze the metal pin and up they come. There's our fuel rail. I'm gonna get something to put that underneath. I'm just doing this to try and make life easier on myself. So these injectors have a little bit like this, a little clip. Hope you can see that. And of course there are 4 of them, and they just slide out. And that is your retainer for the fuel injector. There we go. And there's the fuel. There's the fuel in the rail. that I couldn't drain out when I was doing the pump and everything. And so my towel here has sort of benefited me. Now, these injectors will have the top O-ring and the bottom O-ring, right? If you were cleaning these and putting them back in, you would want to get a new O-ring for each end. And my phone got too hot and it stopped recording. My apologies. So basically what you missed in the video I tried to take was that I finished installing the injectors and put the clips back on and put the fuel rail back in and bolted it back up. So pretty straightforward process. I do want to point out one thing that's really important here, and that is to make sure that you use some kind of lubrication on the O-rings. So of course you do have the O-rings that go down into the actual manifold, and then you have the O-rings at the top that go into the fuel rail. So I use petroleum jelly. I recommend something, just don't put them in dry. Some people use engine oil, some people will use dielectric grease or brake caliper grease or whatever, but just use something, use a light coat. Make sure you don't get any of that lubrication into the actual path of the fuel if you can help it, and then they should go in pretty easily and make the process pretty solid. So I'm gonna go ahead and, not today, but on a different day, I'm gonna go ahead and try and start the car. So let's jump to that and see if it runs like it should. And welcome back to the next morning. We're gonna go ahead and see how our work turned out here. It wants to. Looks good. Looks good, sounds good. Now we can go ahead and do all the rest of the maintenance we have planned. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hopefully we'll see you in the next Volvo video. Cheerio.